Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. Economic analysis has always sort of played a role in state aid assessments, particularly given the changes that the Commission made to the state aid framework in 2014. But there's very much been the focus on financial economic analysis in state aid cases. And from my own experience, we see that in particular in preparing the economic financial evidence to show whether measures constitute aid, so whether they're in line with what's called the market economy operator principle. And also there's an increasing acceptance of the importance of financial economic analysis as part of state aid litigation cases in front of the European courts. So there's always really, over the last few years, been an emphasis on financial economic analysis. The main change that we're starting to see is in terms of the importance of the role of competition economics. So this is an area where state aid has lagged behind other areas of competition law, so for example mergers, antitrust or abuse of dominance. But there's a move within state aid to change that. And in particular, that's been sort of accelerated by an increased focus by the European Commission on ex post evaluations. So what I mean by that is looking to see whether the aid actually had the intended effects when the Commission, that were expected at the time of the Commission approving the aid. And in particular, in that assessment, there's quite an important role for assessing whether aid measures are likely to distort competition or not. And that will lead to, I expect, an increasing role for competition economics as well. I mean, state aid has always been an important part of competition law. I think with the Commission's general focus on corporate tax, the state aid tax investigations obviously being a part of that, with the headline cases such as the Apple, the Fiat Finance and Starbucks cases, they've really sort of raised people's attention and the focus on the importance of complying with state aid rules. So they've really very much focused people's attention on the need to comply with state aid rules, particularly, so for example in the Apple case, the amount of aid that Apple is required to pay back is 13 billion, and that doesn't include the interest payment. So it just shows you the large amounts that can sometimes be at stake in state aid cases. So I expect the tax state aid cases to continue throughout 2019. In 2019, we're likely to see the first judgments from the General Court being available on some of the headline state aid cases, and that will really set the precedent in terms of how the court approaches the tax state aid issues. I would also perhaps anticipate there would be further in-depth state aid investigations into tax announced by the Commission. So I'd expect tax to remain on top of the agenda. But in addition, given the amount of aid that's provided in the energy sector, I would expect energy state aid cases also to continue to be sort of a key aspect throughout 2019. And of course, depending on how things go in the next few weeks, next few months, you may also start to see the impact of Brexit and the potential effects that may have in terms of the need for companies to have increasingly amounts of aid in order to respond to any adverse impact that Brexit may cause. In terms of what it means for state aid, last week there was the draft withdrawal agreement announced by the European Commission, by the UK government. If that is accepted, what that will mean will be that for any new aid that's provided by the UK government after the end of any transitional period, instead of the European Commission being responsible for monitoring that, it's likely that the Competition and Markets Authority, the CMA, in the UK would have control of and responsibility for monitoring state aid. The one exception that's been proposed to that is any aid that's provided by the UK to Northern Ireland, that will still be a responsibility of the European Commission to monitor, and that's as part of the backstop sort of solution in terms of avoiding any sort of hard border in Ireland. It has been announced also that the state aid rules in the UK would have to be quite closely aligned to the European Commission's framework. So in theory, state aid was the key part of the referendum campaign, and the potential for, if we're out of the EU, for the UK government to give greater amounts of state funding, and that's probably unlikely to be the case. And that's really for a couple of main reasons. Firstly, the UK has always been very compliant with state aid rules. So if you look at what's happened over the last 5 years or so, to date, there's only actually ever been one negative state aid decision against a UK company. The other factor is that the UK actually gives relatively low amounts of aid compared to other member states. So it's roughly in the region of €100 per capita that the UK government gives, and that's less than half, for example, the amount of aid that the government, say in Germany or France, would give on a per capita basis. So that's why really the UK government has tended to be a strong supporter of state aid rules. The benefits of attending the conference, I would say it's a very wide range of topics that is covered. So this morning we started off with state aid, but there's also cartel damages, sort of antitrust, mergers, so it's really the breadth of topics that are discussed.